We learned an awful lot of very interesting things about what is going on in the North, some of the things that are driving costs in the North, particularly as it relates to electricity. And we're very delighted today to be joined by our additional panel members. And once we get them mic'd up, we will get the opportunity to introduce them. Once again, as we get a chance to introduce them and sort of to set the rules a little bit for this game, each one of the panelists will, after they're introduced, get about 2 minutes to sort of explain a little bit more about who they are and what their interests are related to this issue of energy in the North and how it's being developed and some of the issues and opportunities surrounding it. And then we will be asking the various panel members questions to stimulate the discussion across the members of the panel. But once again, this is really going to be successful if you ask them questions. So from my perspective, there's no particular rules to this game in terms of what questions you want to ask, how you want to ask them. We do ask that you use the mic in the middle of the room. Remember, this is being recorded, so we are trying to capture your thoughts. So as you do pose a question at any given time from the floor to any one of the panelists, we'd ask that you introduce yourself and your organization, and then please frame your question fairly succinctly so the panel members can answer. So without further ado, I'm going to sneak over there and grab a chair and get mic'd up and introduce our panel members. Sitting to my immediate left, we have Madeleine Redfern, and I confess to not having had a chance to really meet Madeleine formally before this. So if I do make some errors in description in her biography due to the unique language in parts of the North, my apologies, and I'm sure you'll correct me. Madeleine is a consultant and actually former mayor of Iqaluit in Nunavut. She originates in the region and is a graduate of the law school there. She has the distinction of not only just having an LLB from Victoria, but she was also the first Inuk to work as a clerk of the Supreme Court of Canada. So definitely someone who has blazed a few trails in her career. Madeleine's a strong social advocate and business person. She has substantial governance experience and volunteer experience in the Aboriginal and Inuit organizations, including a nonprofit housing corporation, also the Inuit Community Center in, now this is where I'm going to get this totally wrong, so.
Oh, it's Tungasabinyak Inuit, it's the Ottawa Community Center.
I would have definitely got that wrong. She's also president of Ottawa an Inuit Head Start Corporation. She's a founding member. Also of the Wabano Aboriginal Health Center, which she's also a founding member of. Until recently, she held the position of the executive director of the QUESTtalks, now I hope I've got this right, Truth Commission, a body that reviewed the effects of the federal government policies in the Eastern Arctic. Madeleine is definitely an advocate, professional, and has worked an awful lot in governance. It shows her dedication and passion towards development of the North and how it affects the Indigenous people. So Madeleine, I will turn this over to you to explain a little bit more about what you do.
It was a wonderful sort of opening presentation to start this morning's discussion, and I think you got a little sense of some of the energy issues and challenges that we face in the North. Also, the fact that Nunavut, out of all the territories and provinces, lags behind. 17 out of our 25 diesel plants are not only past their operating age or lifespan, or very near to it. Yet, we've only replaced one since 1999 with the creation of the territory. So we've inherited infrastructure that was put in place by the Government of Canada and previously the Government of Northwest Territories without much foresight or planning, let alone the resources to address and replace those diesel plants. And with the current sort of replacement of one diesel plant every 10 years with 25 communities, that would take us 250 years. The costs of each replacement of a diesel generator is in the millions. We've just had an upgrade in Naxalwit, and that's cost us $28 million. The proposed hydro dam project in our community, which I understand has now been delayed as a result of some consultant mistakes, and I can profess that I'm not one of those ones, so is in the range of $300 to $500 million. And our debt cap for the territorial government was $200 million, and it's just been bumped up to $400. But yet that's already been slated for our $350 million airport in Naxalwit. So when David said earlier that, when you only have a population of 33,000 in the territory, and in Naxalwit, 7,000, about 250 residents, there's absolutely no way that our Could Energy Corporation can recover those costs from the market. I feel for them. We're just actually, I think a couple days ago, before I came down, saw on the online paper that QEC had made another application for a power rate increase, and my jaw dropped because we've been subjected to about, I think this is number 6 in about 2 years. One of the first things that I had to deal with as mayor in my term was a proposed power rate increase of 18.88%, and scrambling to even talk to my SAO and my director of finance. Well, what does that mean for us as the municipal corporation? So they crunched the numbers and they said, well, that's $1 million. With a $35 million budget, an extra $1 million of cost was significant. And that either means that we had to bump up our taxes, and we're the only tax-based community in all of Nunavut. The other communities actually don't have any. And as such, it's pretty daunting to consider, what that impact was not only to our municipal budget, or finding ways in which to cut back programs and services, which of course no one finds that as a popular option. We did actually kind of learn to become a little bit more energy efficient, teaching our staff, turn those lights off when you leave at the end of the day, turn them off at lunchtime, turn them off when you leave the room. And it was interesting to sort of see the staff begin to take ownership of that. And also, since we have such a small homeowner base in Naxalwit, which I probably think is outside, there might be Rankin and Cambridge Bay, Kugluktuk, the regional centers. Most of our communities, the home ownership base is very, very little. The vast majority of people are living in social housing units, staff units, different levels of government. So RCMP have staff units, the nurses have staff units, and even the private sector. So you might have 2 stores like Northern and Co-op. They also provide staff housing. And so it's a very small number of people. And we recognize, as you saw up there, it's your power bill is significant. Your heating bill is significant. I mean, outside of my mortgage in Naxalwit, I spend several $1,000s a month just to cover my internet, my phone, my power, my fuel, and yet 70% of our people live in poverty. So the government helps offset, many of those costs. And when I was traveling up in Hall Beach, there were 2 employees from the energy efficiency division of the community government services up there attempting to educate the residents about energy efficiency. I can honestly say without much success, unfortunately, because when people have their electrical and heating costs covered by the government, there's no sense of ownership. And so it's really common even in Iqaluit, unfortunately, where you can be minus 20 outside or colder and you see windows wide open because the heat in the units have been jacked up, or they have little or no ability to control it, because if you're living in a multiple unit, most people don't even know where the control system is. And so community of Hull Beach, about 650 people, their government spends $5 million a year on their energy costs. So you can imagine it's just daunting. So you've got the issue of outdated infrastructure, very small population. Over 90% of our territorial government's budget comes from the federal government, because as a territory, we don't own or manage our resources. We don't have the benefit of the Yukon, or recently now the NWT, where there's been a devolution agreement. So some of the royalties and the funds that can come from resource development that can boost real money into the territorial government's economy, we just don't have or nor enjoy. Our premier is without a doubt pushing for that. It's a bit of a challenge, because I think that at the same time we need to build up some governance capacity. We struggle. Another issue that plays into this whole sort of equation is that we have a long history, long in the sense of about 50 years, of a high rate of transients, people coming into our territory and going, usually work placements for about 2 to 5 years. And that's in all sectors. So that's not just in the territorial government or the federal government, their bureaucracies, within QEC, our energy corporation, all business, municipal level of government. And what that does is, when you have such a high rotation and turnover of people coming in, is that, one, they often don't know the history, they don't know the geography, the culture, and they're rarely given any orientation or transition, because there's just simply no overlap to really get the foundational knowledge that people need. So I'm actually, pleasantly surprised when, for about 99% of the time, our energy reliability is very high. But when it does go down, and unfortunately not like the Yukon, while we are, it's a diesel backup, sometimes it has failed. Sanikiluaq, one of our southernmost communities in the south portion of the Hudson Bay, their generator went out and they were without power and heat for several weeks, and they actually had to use a Hercules to bring in the generator engine. In Rankin Inlet a few years back, the generator went down, and the second backup generator went down, and so they were subjected to sort of very short, periods of power, rolling power, in attempt to just, not have everything freeze up, and that took them a couple weeks. In Iqaluit, even when I was mayor, the sheer number of power outages was rather amazing. But thankfully, we knew we were going through an upgrade as well. So some of it was predating the upgrade. But I knew people who were working at that plant saying, we're operating in the red. When you're driving a car, and literally it's you're in critical, and ideally what you usually do in those situations is just shut everything down. Well, we don't have that luxury. Always hearing, at least from my inside sources, that everything was, on a shoestring, everything's just Band-Aid, and a real fear about what that means, not only to the capital city, but also what it means to the people that we actually serve. So it's there are immense challenges, but at the same time, when we're looking at replacing 17 out of our 25 diesel generators, hopefully in the near future, is that there is opportunities to look at options, to look to Nuke and the hydro dam project that they've built, and the opportunities for synergies, which I don't think yet we've adopted. So when we see that there's a Peregrine Diamond, mine that's possibly going to be in our community, near our community, when we look at, outgrowing our water source, when we look at the fact that we need a new dump, and there's our electric hydro potential project, I would like us to be able to look at how we can possibly look at each of those and see whether or not, which is the best location for the dam. How does that fit possibly with, those other infrastructure issues to maximize our limited resources, which is what they do in Greenland. We tend not to do that either in many parts of Canada, and we do that even less in the north, where you would think that that would be the ideal place to do it. But people are so fixated on their own sort of jurisdiction that opportunities to partner have not been maximized. And I love the approach that they've done in the Yukon, with that sort of charrette workshop. I would love to see that happen in our area. With the hydro dam project, one of the community consultation sessions was actually set up on a Friday night. How many people are going to come out, down south, Toronto, Ottawa, Calgary, Vancouver, to a community consultation on a Friday night? Well, I can tell you, the turnout was, I think, the interpreter showed up and maybe the people that were paid to be there, but literally there were no community members. There's also a lot of mistrust. People don't feel a sense of ownership to these issues. The lack of information, is often just as insufficient. The ability to actually participate in assessing those options and owning the issue, being part of it, is something without a doubt that I think we need to adopt. And so I also want to just go back to that Hull Beach scenario, because in that situation, I posed the question to the two, men with that daunting task of attempting to teach energy efficiency in that community or in all our communities. I said, well, what about, having some sort of incentive? So if you're not paying your energy costs, but you know that, you're spending $5 million in Hull Beach, and if Hull Beach could save, $200,000 or $500,000 by becoming more energy efficient, why not at least tell them or commit that that money is going to stay in the community but be used in other ways? Used possibly in their schools, used in, for other infrastructure projects. And he thought, well, I'm just a bureaucrat, I can't even pose that. That's not how the territorial government thinks. But I think that, there are ways in which to find both sort of conservation issues, approach to development of energy issues, that we kind of need to think outside the box. And people, as I said, need to be part of that engagement. They need to be part of that relationship with their government, with our energy corporation, because without a doubt, we are consumers and things are pretty dire. But at the same time, and I'm a bit of an optimistic cynic, because I think, with a small population, with about $1 billion of annual income that we get from the federal government, we can use our limited resources a lot smarter than we currently are.
Madeleine,
so
I think I'll stop you there.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to have too much trouble engaging the panel in our discussions, and there's some very, very interesting things that we will talk about. I'd like to actually introduce Dave Simpson to Madeleine's left at this moment. Dave is the Vice President of in-franchise sales and customer care at Union Gas Limited. I understand this is a relatively recent promotion for you, so congratulations, Dave. He leads this residential, commercial, industrial demand-side management function for Union Gas, and he is part of the Union Gas leadership group. He joined Union Gas, I believe, in around 1987, so he has a considerable number of years of experience in this area in a number of growing areas as his expertise has grown. Before assuming his current role, Dave was the Director of Storage and Transmission Operations and was accountable for both the safe and efficient operations of the company's natural gas operations and their transmission needs. So Dave brings a wealth of experience in the natural gas area to this discussion. And of course, we heard also from Dave. I'm going to have fun with this in terms of addressing Dave and Dave, or my other brother Dave, or however this works, to being one of the solutions or potential solutions for the North. So without further ado, Dave Simpson.
Well, thank you. And thank you to Quest for allowing me to be here today and enabling this dialogue. It feels, and I'll confess right up front, at first, a little bit out of context because Ontario is a very big province, but it didn't make the map. And that's okay because the context is different, but I'm not so sure.
The country's supposed to stop at Manitoba. It's too big after that.
I'm not so sure. In fact, I'm convinced the parallel between opportunities and challenges, I think there's some common threads. So that's why I really look forward to being part of the dialogue. Union Gas is basically the local distribution company for natural gas in Ontario, partnered with Enbridge, who covers Ottawa and Toronto, and Union spanning the rest of the province from Manitoba to eastern Ontario and down towards Windsor. And some of the things I think we'll pick up on, and I'm not going to go on in an intro, but I heard themes of opportunity related to LNG. You heard from David this morning. That also is an opportunity in some parallel and yet different regards in Ontario and the U.S. And I think we're going to learn from some of the technology and innovation examples there. And the other I heard quite a bit by both the other panel guests is consultation, something that we're very highly familiar with in Ontario as well. And we've learned lessons, good way and the hard way, and have some success stories that I think we can model off of as well. So with that, I'll kick it back to you.
Thank you very much. During the presentation, I was struck by the high electricity costs in some of the areas in the north, but it's also struck me that we may not have the whole story there. In terms of the capital and infrastructure costs, particularly of diesel, I always think of diesel, the actual cost is only capturing a small portion of the full environmental costs or the full life cycle costs of operating a diesel system. So I'm kind of curious as to what utilities are going to do or how governments are going to respond as you try to either expand the infrastructure or replace infrastructure to these very, very high embedded costs that we don't normally deal with, and what kind of mechanisms that utilities and governments may be thinking about to overcome these huge economic hurdles that are not really reflected in the current price. And I'd like to sort of have Dave Morrison sort of tackle that one first.
Well, there's a couple of things. First off, you know, the existing system benefits from the fact that it's there, and nobody really wants to talk about, you know, life cycle analysis or life cycle costs of diesel, right? Because we don't have any alternative. So, you know, it's there, it's staring us in the face. We are just in the process of completing some life cycle analysis, and I want to make sure I don't get it wrong. So I've got actually 3 separate pieces being done on life cycle analysis, one by Pembina, one by Marbeck, and one by a consulting engineering company called Morrison Hershfield. Because now I have to compare the life cycle costs of LNG to diesel. And, you know, this whole issue of shale gas or unconventional gas or frack gas versus conventional gas is a big issue, even though we have no gas in the Yukon that we're talking about. But those, just to use your point in terms of being illustrative, those issues are much, much more important today than they ever were previously. Right? So those kinds of issues. So they come back to that piece that I talked about. I would group under this piece called social license. Are we, those are issues that are really important to our First Nations partners. What are we doing? How are we doing it? Are we doing it in a way that promotes sustainable development? What is I could well see us having a discussion about, well, you know what? You guys should just stick with those diesels because life cycle analysis of some gas might be different than diesel, might not be as good as diesel. But to me, it's the total picture. It's going beyond consultation in the sense of saying, well, you know what? We've already decided what we're going to do. We're going to come out and consult with you, i.e. we're going to tell you what we're going to do. It's getting down to some meaningful community engagement where these choices are all part of the choices you make going forward. You can choose to move to gas. It has some great economics. It has really good GHG emissions compared to diesel. Maybe the SOx is a little higher, the NOx is a little less, but you are consciously making those decisions as part of a community, an engaged community. And then look at the wider picture as to what other things can you do. And I'm just using LNG as that example. But governments in the North are no different, and I'm being maybe far too cynical, but governments in the North are no different than governments in the South in the sense that they don't tend to govern with big picture ideas. They tend to, operate in the timeline that they're operating in of the day and thinking about integrated solutions, thinking about how you build in. I'll give you an example. One of the things that we did when we were looking at this as gas as an option is we went out and we went and talked to all the different mining companies that we could think of, most of whom are would be off grid, to see if we could aggregate the gas supply. Right? What was going to be the best for everybody? Trying to expand the discussion, as Madeleine's saying, is let's go out and talk to the mining guy. Let's go talk to the community about heat or, the various options you have. We, I think, find maybe out of necessity that we look at things with a bigger, broader set of eyes than, okay, we're just going to solve for this problem today. Because if you continue down that path, you end up inefficiently using the resources that you have available to you. I could take this money and employ it over here, but if I employ it in such a way as that I can't actually expand, and again, I'll use the gas piece as an example, that I can't actually expand that to either give me retail opportunities to supply truck fleets and get them off diesel fuel, if I can't expand it to make sure that I could do a district heating option in an area in downtown Whitehorse where a district heating option would be a fabulous way to get people off diesel fuel and everything else, then I'm not really thinking about the big picture. If I don't expand it to think about how are all those other mines good, if I reduce greenhouse gas emissions in one mine and you three all go build another mine and jack them up again, I haven't solved a darn thing. I haven't done anything. It's thinking wider, thinking more integrated, and thinking about engagement, not consultation. You've got to get people, you've got to talk to people about the solutions. When we did that charrette piece, I was flabbergasted about, we had 100 people in the room for 3 days, and every evening we had a public session. So we had another 50 or 60 people come in. We went through kind of a half an hour of what we did all day. We said to people, you guys pick. Where do you rank all of this? Solar, wind, geothermal, everything. Two of the most popular items, nuclear and biomass. Go figure. Nuclear and biomass. Now, part of it was the nuclear guy was a great little salesman. He was a prof from University of Saskatchewan, and nobody would argue with him about nuclear. He was an engaging little guy, right? He was smart, wasn't, but he explained nuclear from a different set of eyes. I want to go back to a point Madeleine made, which I think is really, really, really important. I did not stand up in that room and talk about all these things and say, we should do these things. We had independent experts talk about their knowledge base. The solar guy talked about solar. And people could, of all parts of that spectrum on solar, well, solar is a really dumb idea in the north because it's dark half the time. Okay, there's that person. Then there's somebody over here that says, yeah, but what can I get out of solar? How can I benefit from solar? There's got to be some application. So, my wife went to Canadian Tire, bought these little solar yard lights that she sticks in the lawn. I can tell you, in the middle of the winter, when I look outside at night, they're on. Now, they get their light from somewhere. So everything isn't black and white. It isn't not solar or not diesel or not wind. It's looking at the options and the trade-offs with big, wide eyes. Good morning, Chris. I didn't see you come in. Thank you.
I'd like to sort of pick up on that a little bit. LNG is kind of the new player to the game, although it's been around for a long time. But it's really it's an alternative, and it's a non-traditional alternative because we don't have too much LNG around. So in bringing LNG as part of the solution, I was wondering how you dealt with that from both a regulatory perspective and introducing that into the mix as we start to talk about integrating something that's going to have a definite capital cost because the infrastructure doesn't exist there. So Dave Simpson, you've got lots of experience in LNG. So how do you deal with that issue where you're introducing something that's probably going to be more costly, at least initially, into the system where there's not an existing infrastructure?
So LNG, I think we have to back up a second because it's really important to put North American LNG, I think, in the right context. People are starting to understand the term LNG, and I would say 10 years ago, largely it was just the energy community, maybe in the natural gas community that understood it because we were going to have to import it. So as a continent, we were right on the cusp of dwindling supplies in Western Canada and the Gulf of Mexico, and in order to maintain balance, import liquefied natural gas. We have done a 180-degree shift, and people are starting to realize that. And I would say, as well as we have to manage that responsibly, that opportunity, it is turning itself into just that, an opportunity. We are exporting LNG or setting ourselves up to, as a continent, export it. So that speaks to how the game has changed from a natural gas perspective. It is obviously clean, and the biggest benefit is affordability. So the math that David referred to earlier has been complemented by the change in the North American supply picture. So that, just a bit of context favorably on that. And I would say in terms of introducing it into the system, we're still front edge on that. My closest experience to it in Ontario is through the work from a transport perspective. Now, we have at Union Gas, most would not know, a small LNG facility near Sudbury. And it has a very traditional purpose, there's about 60 of these in North America, to serve peak demand. So we liquefy it, we store it in this enormous thermos, 100 feet diameter by 100 feet tall, and it's there as a backup or a reserve to protect the system, if you will. We're literally on the cusp of, and many others are, how do we take that and actually complement its purpose to serve, as David quickly alluded to, a growing opportunity in the transport sector. So heavy-duty trucks can and are now running on liquefied natural gas. And you will see that migrate. It's picking up speed in a sense in the U.S., coming to Canada, multiple parts. And I think that context, back to my earlier point, I think what we're learning And the companies that are way ahead of it are folks like GE and others, Shell and others. And that, I'm sure, is what is leveraged into an opportunity that David's group has taken advantage of. There's the complement of an opportunity was created with multiple applications. Is it for transport? Is it for serving a remote community, a mine, marine? Shell has announced a huge facility to be built in Sarnia, and its primary function will be to repower what is existing diesel lake fleet. So I love how the market builds momentum and opportunity. I think from a utility perspective, we see this as an abundance of opportunity, and I look forward to kind of how do we then migrate that into, whether it be remote Ontario or remote Yukon, leverage points, because I think the opportunity is there.
Thank you. I was struck listening to some of the last few answers of how this is something new for the North and how charrettes were something new for the North. And I'm very interested in exploring sort of the dialogue that needs to take place between utilities, new potential suppliers, and the community. And the North, from what I've understood, it has some very, very unique cultural attributes that I don't think we always appreciate in the South. So I'm wondering if I could have Madeleine sort of take a look at or examine some of the challenges in bringing something like this, or just bringing the dialogue to the North. And is it simply a matter of energy literacy and explaining things, or are there cultural aspects that we're missing here? And is there a political context that we perhaps don't appreciate in the South? So I'd like you to sort of think about that as what is different in the North, and what special things do you have to introduce into the dialogue? And then I'd be interested in hearing from the other two members of the panel on how they fit those kind of comments into their thought process.
So I'll just speak from a Nunavut perspective and one from the Inuit versus the NWT or Yukon, which has a very different history and different current context. Unfortunately, I would say that, especially with my work with the Commission, I learned very intimately the historical sort of relationship that government has with its Indigenous people in our area has been one, I would say, is a discrimination of low expectation, which affects, I think, the whole gamut of many issues, including energy. There is, as I indicated earlier, there's so many people dealing with their day-to-day struggles, high rates of poverty, food insecurity, overcrowded housing, that energy issues is not really at the forefront of anyone's day-to-day life, except when, as I said, you're a private homeowner and you're working and you're having to pay that bill. Nonetheless, I see and need an opportunity to actually bring these daily considerations like energy into our schools. Our children, without a doubt, should be understanding, our history, which includes the infrastructure and the how, as a government, at the different levels, you try to meet, all these demands and needs of your constituents, and so that we can increase, the level of these students or young people to become more aware and engaged in democracy, in their governance, and where can I fit in, even in a career path. Visits to our power plant generator, or visits, from people in this sector into the schools. They work as linesmen, they work as diesel generator mechanics, they work as in administration. And so that it becomes more real, and that people understand what the true costs of energy are. The unfortunate thing is that all too often, as David was pointing out, even when government or energy corporation feels as if they have to go through a consultation process because, let's say, it's an Iqaluit dam or is being proposed, is that people need that baseline of information. But too often, there's a sense that, this is just a rote exercise, this is an obligation, we bring in some consultants, they talk jargon to people, they don't know what it means, and you have to do that groundwork, explain it to them, but in a respectful way, and then allow people to digest that and then really engage. So I don't know if I would say that it's so much cultural. I think the cultural aspects or dynamics that I've seen exist has been just one of that, well, you're too undereducated, or you're too stupid to understand. We're only doing this because we have to. You talk at people. I'm not surprised, when we have so many community consultations on everything, when you only get 10 people show up, and it's usually the same 10 people, no matter what the issue is. It could be energy, it could be, mining development, it could be fisheries. It's the same 10 people because people have been turned off because it's not an honest engagement. And the person who's there, worse yet, often can't even answer the questions. So it's a highly technical, specialized issue, and yet, these supposedly, uneducated people can't get their own questions answered, which is rather shocking. So I'm cautious about sort of, saying that it's cultural. It's more of a not a race cultural issue. It's a government or corporate mindset of not appreciating that the people in the community need to be treated respectfully, provide them the information, let them learn about it, and then let them respond and listen to them. And we like to also see that what we've actually said, gets incorporated, because it's not just as if some predetermined decision or, outcome has been set way before you've engaged the community.
So, David, you're...
Yeah, I want to use a couple of examples, because I think Madeleine has a really important point here. And no matter where you go, there is some cultural aspect to it, but that's not the driving point. I'm going to use a practical example to hopefully illustrate the point. So we have been working with, there's a community south of Whitehorse, which was supposed to be cottage owners on a little lake, which is now really, really big homes on the edge of the lake. And it's a lake that's part of my Whitehorse hydro system. It feeds the hydro plant in Whitehorse. We have a hydro dam right in Whitehorse. And this water feeds this. So we've been trying to do some work on increasing the water levels for about 4 or 5 years. And we've been talking to people. So we go out and we have meetings and we work with these people. We've sent consultants out, and they've studied the water and the birds and all this kind of stuff. And there's 2 things that have happened over the last couple of years that are really, really, really kind of bring this thing home to roost. I was out there a year ago, I go out, take a couple of staff who are experts in certain areas, because I can't answer really very many questions about anything, because I really don't know much about anything. But I know how to talk to people. So we're talking, and it kind of hits me. You know what? I've been here 6 times. I've explained this 6 times. They didn't get it one bit. And I don't talk, lots of people do. No jargon from me. I'm just trying to illustrate. I got little boards up. I'm trying to show them, this is what we're doing. Oh, you're raising the water in the lake. No, I'm not. Years I've been doing this. And it dawned on me. I did 2 things. I went out and visited most of those cottage owners by myself, walked up and down the property. What are they concerned about? Well, now I can see what they're concerned about. Each one has they're all afraid for their own piece of property. Big message to me. So we create they want to have a little advisory committee about people who live on this lake. I said, sure, you guys, absolutely. We'll fund it. You guys can have some meetings. because what they need to do is they need to explain it to each other. They don't need me to tell them what it says. They need to tell each other. So I have a young fella who's helping one of my staff. He's trying to get this thing set up. He just can't get out of his own way. Oh, yeah, but, well, they're going to have meetings and we're not invited. Well, yeah, that's okay. That's okay with you? Well, they're going to, how are they going to, what are they going to say? Look, they're going to figure out they're going to interpret this wrong. No, they're going to interpret it the way they need to do it. He has been I get an email saying, geez, we don't understand what's going on. We're having a problem. Leave them alone. Let them have their meetings. They'll invite us when they're ready when they need something from us, they'll invite us. And he's not trying to be difficult. He's not trying to, he just can't get his head around the fact that they might have some issues that are different and they may want to deal with them in their own way. And that's what we miss most of the time, is letting people figure out some of this stuff for themselves and reach their own conclusion. And then help them understand what the pros and cons are of what they now have reached as a conclusion. That's what's really important when you're trying to deal with people. You can't force them to understand what you want them to understand. You cannot force them to do that. They won't do it.
Could I just build on that for a second? Because I don't want to add to the community perspective that was offered, because it was bang on. I just complemented, in a sense, with other stakeholders at the table from a governmental perspective. And what we have found, again, different application, but I think there's things to be gleaned from it. In Ontario, it's fair to say we get a fair amount of news attention on the file of energy. I'm not so sure it's exactly the attention that we all are looking for. And what we have been doing as a gas industry, both the Canadian Gas Association and the local distribution companies, is trying to raise awareness with stakeholders like the government of things that are emerging and how we have to pay attention to them. There are implications of that balanced picture that David drew out that we really have to appreciate and understand, because nothing's a free move. If you build with fuel X, maybe you need fuel Y as a standby, and is that factored in? Wind is a very dominant issue in the province, serves certainly a good role. Natural gas is actually key to complementing the use of wind. And that, again, isn't well understood. So I find the parallel of making sure you've got your stakeholders engaged, educated, is across stakeholders. It isn't just the community, it is also the politicians, so that we're making the right choices going forward. So that things like what Quest is pushing or pursuing, integrated systems, combined heat and power, are these efficient modes being considered in parallel with many of the other decisions being made, so that we don't look back in hindsight and go, whoa, I wonder why that new plant did not build in Ontario. Because I think if we talk about what attracts business now, you start to get that stakeholder engagement on all levels that we need.
I don't know whether the audience has noticed this, but what has really struck me is these are lessons from north of 60, if I would term it that. But what we've just heard is probably something that everyone can learn south of 60, because I don't think that is something we've solved south of 60 either. So it's nice to hear that those kind of issues have come to the fore in the north, and perhaps we could learn something particularly about having people holding meetings when officials aren't present, and then listening to the outcomes of that. So I think that's, for me, it's something very important that I just gleaned from this conversation. I would like to challenge the audience again. This is a forum also for you, so if you do have questions, you only will have these people for a limited amount of time. So by all means, feel free to ask questions. They can't all come from me. Having said that, of course, I get to change. Oops.
I was going to say, does somebody want to ask a question? We're chatting, so.
Please, use the microphone, please.
Good morning, panel members. Well, the session today has been extremely beneficial. But my question is, maybe all panel members can answer this, related to the role of the regulator in all this. Now, David alluded to earlier that the regulatory regimes, and by regulators I mean our utility commissions and energy boards, are drawn along the provincial and territorial lines in Canada. And I wanted to know, what can the regulator do in order to incent further innovation and create an environment where new ideas, new alternatives, and new technology is promoted?
Sure, I'll start from an Ontario perspective. So it's interesting because you're absolutely bang on. Every province will be slightly different. So purely in Ontario, and kind of apropos to the topic, the Ontario Energy Act specifically calls out gas for transportation as being something that is not regulated. And then you move into the arena of the dialogue today, and it's a little bit gray. And I'm speaking specifically to Ontario. So I do know that we've actually engaged in, in a dialogue, just like we're speaking of. Talk to your stakeholders, make them aware of the changing trends. We just had that chat recently, and it is on their radar. They are trying to, gravitate towards what's the best model of treating, and now I'm talking about trucking LNG into a remote community within this province. How do we best manage that and make it grow and prosper? Their default is not, it must be regulated. They will be, and I trust they will be open to what's the best model, but that could be different province to province, so I'd look to the rest of the panel.
Well, sorry, I'll talk about regulation broadly. Utilities are regulated, as I mentioned earlier, more or less along the same lines across the country. But we're regulated by what I would term economic regulators. So they're worried about, is this the right price and the right option for the ratepayer? And you look at it strictly from that point of view. It's a system that doesn't really take into much consideration innovation, social license, First Nation relationships. It doesn't really build on that unless it's about the numbers. So, across the country, we would need to see a shift into regulate the regulatory system, looking at much broader set of criteria when you're considering what are the best energy options. Even the Ontario Energy Board is really an economic regulator. Now, they have some leeway here, and this board may have a few policies there, but as a system, economic regulation doesn't support sustainability, innovation, First Nations relationships, and community engagement up to a point. Yeah, well, we went out and talked to people, but we went out to talk to people and it cost $1 million because it was really meaningful and it took a long time. Yeah, probably not so much.
Maybe I could just answer for, in our area, because of the land claim agreement, anything that's now development, like the Iqaluit Hydro Dam project or any other sort of resource area, is that we now have to also think about the whole going through the Nunavut impact review process. So there's environmental regulations, and in addition, there's the impact benefit agreement. And so we've, through the land claim, actually kind of dealt with that whole environmental social aspect. And we're learning as every new development application goes through how much information or consultation or engagement is required. Every development is different, and so the engagement is not necessarily all the same. And it's been interesting to see the evolution of that because it is way more formalized.
If I could just close on a comment David made, and I would agree with your summation of regulation. It's really about rates, which is fair. And when the question really hit on innovation. And I think in large part, while the regulated utility like Union Gas will play a role, bigger roles will be played by the market. And I can speak specifically to an effort by the Canadian Gas Association. They're working with Natural Resources Canada. They're working with the Minister of Northern Communities, and they're working with other entities to really build a roadmap for remote communities in Canada. And I think that leverages into then industry to pick up and also play a major role, which they're doing. That's the market and evolution of what we just saw by David has grown tremendously. Just in the GE has announced LNG in a box, and Storm's right here. He spoke to it about 2 months ago. CNG in a box, and his competitors are doing the same. And I think market is sensing the opportunities more broadly, which is good.
We have some questions at the back of the room. Tanya is moving around with the mic, so if you do have a question, please put up your hand, and we'll try to answer them in the order that which we've got questions. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you. My name is Robin Hutchison. I'm an energy consultant and developer, and I've read through numerous energy studies and waste management studies for northern communities. And it's interesting how one particular technology is absent from the discussion, and this is just from my readings. I'm not privy to all the conversations you've had in your communities, but the concept of anaerobically digesting organic food wastes and biosolids from wastewater treatment plants and so on and so forth has numerous opportunities for providing electricity and thermal energy, and as well as addressing waste management issues that are growing in the north. And I think there are so many things I could speak to about this, but the north is the canary in the coal mine when it comes to climate change. And if you can divert waste from traditional land applications to an anaerobic digester, you're capturing that methane that is otherwise being released, and you have a 25 times greenhouse gas reduction. And so we've been in conversation with the city of Yellowknife around this subject matter, and I would love the opportunity to advance this discussion with Iqaluit and Whitehorse, and I have a position paper here that talks about the potential for biogas energy production for northern communities. And it won't be a big player for the north, but we need to look at every opportunity, and every community in the north has waste, and there's an opportunity to capture that latent energy and put it to good use. So after this session, if you'll give me a couple minutes, I'd like to give you a discussion paper, and we can perhaps follow up afterwards. And if you have any other thoughts, or if you've ever had these discussions in your community, I'd love to hear about that as well.
Is there a specific question that you have for the panel members?
Well, I guess the last question I have is, have you had a discussion around anaerobic digestion in any of your communities as one of the possible technologies?
So I'm going to jump in and answer this. When I was talking earlier and I went through a list of follow-up charrettes that we had on technologies, and I went to wind and LNG and biomass, the one I couldn't remember was waste to energy. So, so we did a waste to energy study a year ago. Not the anaerobic digester that you're talking about. We looked at a gasification process. We did quite a bit of work in partnership with the city of Whitehorse on their landfill. Came to the conclusion that even though there is waste, there isn't enough waste to economically, in Whitehorse, produce energy from waste or electricity. It just wasn't, for the cost, it just wasn't going to give us enough output. So that was our short foray into waste, but it was part of the process, and the important part of the process was that we looked at it, we came to a conclusion, we went to the city and said, here are our conclusions. We're not advancing this project, but you, the city, can have this. And if technology changes or something happens with waste in the city, we're happy to have another look at it, or you can take this project and advance it yourself, but it isn't going to fit for us at the moment.
And I'll just compliment Union's position on renewable natural gas, because we actually put forward a proposal to our regulator a couple of years ago now to start to try to really percolate that market in Ontario. And it was kicked back with some to-dos and follow-ups, so it's still a work in progress, but I know it's near and dear to the heart of Quest as well. So I think it's important to hit on that it is actually not lost. To me, the model that, and I think scale is important, as David alludes to. We have a facility in Hamilton, Ontario that does have a wastewater or a waste treatment plant, as you're describing, puts the natural gas back into our grid, actually, to be transported onto other customers. I like the model that uses it to fuel waste trucks, and then maybe complemented with gas, natural gas, to have that CNG option, and you really see a cycle like that. So I think it's a point well made that where it fits, it can be a very viable option.
I'm not supposed to do this, but we've just finished a project actually for biodigester, and it seems to me that the issue is often education and size. And so the public isn't really aware of a lot of these things. We're actually putting a very small unit here in Ottawa so that the public can learn about them. And we've done that at the request of, I guess, the Canadian Science and Technology Museums. Odd to say we're putting it in a museum since it's relatively new technology, but it is the case. But I think you have to engage more. That seems to be the issue. It's still relatively new, at least in terms of people's mindsets. End of Grant's commercial. Next question, please.
Good morning. Chris Henderson with Lumos Energy. Great panel and great subject. One comment on regulation and one question to the panel on the process forward. And some context. I mean, there's 4 remote projects that we're engaged with right now, advising the Aboriginal communities, Hartley Bay and on hydro in BC. Lac Brochet in Manitoba, the largest off-grid community up there, and in Nukjuak in Nunavik for a hydro project there, which we've been at for 5 years. My meeting that was this morning while I was late was with the Wastetoenergy project, which is a transmission line for 10 remote communities in Northern Ontario, and looking at the benefit calculations related to that. What we find with regulators across the country, and I think I've converted more off-grid communities to renewables than anybody else, so I'm pretty confident about this. The fundamental issue with regulators when they look at off-grid power projects is the amount of subsidy from the rate base into the off-grid sector. So as people have said here, it's an economic issue. You can't change anything if you take that perspective for 2 reasons. One, if you take that perspective, all you do, and I'll tell you what they've done with subsidies, is they've largely undercalculated the subsidy, because when they go to the rate base, the utilities, they get beat up by the main ratepayer buyers of energy, particularly the businesses who say, oh, no, it shouldn't. So therefore, people like Quebec Hydro, rather than saying the price, the avoided cost is 60 cents a kilowatt hour in Nunavik, they say it's 40. And now it's a peg price. You can't change that. If you can't beat that, you can't do off-grid project that's renewable or energy efficiency or transmission. In addition, the ratepayer structure or the energy board structure says you just have to deal with price. They're not dealing with life cycle pricing or life cycle analysis, and they're not dealing with other potential benefits of a community nature or environmental nature. If you have that reality, nothing's going to happen. So therefore, if you actually want to change anything with off-grid communities, the government policy structure has to change, an instruction to the regulator that says other factors are important if you really want to move these projects. So my question to the panel, before I go, this book just I'll give my commercial. Aboriginal Power is just published. If you want to talk to me after. It just came out last week. There's a special section on northern remote communities. The question I would say is that my observation has been with projects that your organizations are promoting and others, is you need a bunch of soft money to be able to assess the technical ability to meet a life cycle test, both technically and financially. And I don't think, and in an off-grid community, since there's no rate structure and no PPA structure, there's no incentive for the private sector to say partner with an Aboriginal community or a utility to partnership with an Aboriginal community to do that. Therefore, if governments, federal and provincial, want to move renewable energy transmission and energy efficiency in remote communities, you're going to have to put some serious coin of a technical nature to analyze the projects. I don't know if that conclusion is fair. Thanks.
So the specific question, again, just very clearly is?
Do you need that soft money to really drive this?
I think it's a a great answer. I'm not sure if you asked the question or we did, because I really actually agree with most of your commentary. And I think what we'll have to take away and sometimes have discussions is that a regulator that's actually employing that role, or is that another level of government? And if it's the latter, then now we're in two different arenas. And I think maybe that's okay, because maybe we're at the time and opportunity where we have to we've got to think out of the box. But I think, as David and I alluded to, as well as Madeleine, is the way we're structured from a regulatory perspective today will somewhat stymie some of that creativity.
Madeleine, I think you probably would like to address this one too.
No, I think it's, as I said before, you're right in the sense of that these projects right now, unless we get in through the Inuit Impact Benefit Agreement, there is literally no appetite, to look at partnering with our Aboriginal or Indigenous corporations. However, I think that is an opportunity that's worth exploring.
I think I want to kind of go back a little bit. I think Chris has got a really important point here. And I think he's moved past the regulator, because he understands the regulator. I was going to do the ad for your book. You took that away from me. God, I don't have anything to say now. This soft money that Chris is talking about, let me try to be illustrative again. I don't know how they're going. I don't know how QUESTtalks are doing this, but if I am going to build a $400 million hydro project, right, there is a huge amount of money at risk before I can tell you today whether or not I can actually technically build that project and it'll work. So, I don't care if it's the biggest, bestest engineering company you've hired in the whole world, and they've picked a site. You A, don't know how much it's going to cost, and you B, don't know how much energy you're going to get out of it, and you C, don't know whether it's really the best project you have, until you've probably spent in the neighborhood of 15% of that $400 million. And that's a rough guess. But so that's $60 million. And I can tell you that QUESTtalks can't afford $60 million of at-risk money, because it is all at-risk money. Because you're doing socioeconomic baseline work, you're doing environmental studies, you're doing pre-engineering or pre-feasibility engineering level kinds of studies. And this is absolutely the bullseye part of the problem. Because where do you get that money? How do you leverage that when you come to renewables? How do we move the North, including Northern Ontario, away from what's the status quo, because the status quo is easy, to turning the system on its head and saying, we have to find the way to finance, manage, approve, whatever that soft money piece is. We have to find that next step, and how do we deal with it? Because you can't put that on the backs of those people. When I talked earlier about this Mayo B project that we built, wouldn't have done it without the federal government. Well, we put, for those of you who are conversant in regulatory terms, we had $200 million worth of assets, and we put $35 million into rate base. So in other words, ratepayers are paying for $35 million of that 200. Now it was an opportunity, everything fit, but those are the kinds of things that to move to renewables and to move to sustainable infrastructure development, to move to integrated infrastructure development in the North, we have to be able to do those things day in and day out. We can't do them once. We've got to find ways to do it all the time. And that, Chris is being a little cheeky, because he knows the answer to the question that he just asked, because he deals with it every day, because he's trying to deal with First Nations communities across the country are having the same struggle. This isn't a North struggle. This is small communities. This is across this country. This is off grid. I mean, this is you guys all live in that little border that American border strip, well, there's a whole bunch of the country doesn't live there. Not certain that you're being supplied with the best kind of options every day anyway, but we're out there struggling, and that's the question. How do we get government to focus their thinking about the big picture versus the little picture? And it's a move that has to happen, transformational. Sorry.
We have another question from the floor.
Yes. My name is Bill Wong. I'm with SAIC Canada, and I've really enjoyed the discussion with the panel. My question is to David Morrison. I enjoyed your talk. Two things popped up when I was listening and watching your slides. Hope to understand what happened and what were the discussions and what you have learned. I'd like to hear about that. First question was, you mentioned that in the north, there were a number of district heating systems, but they were shut down. And I'd like to understand what happened. I'd like to understand why that happened. Yeah. The second question is, you had a nice slide showing the 4 principles and showed wind and so on. Sure. I'd like to understand the discussion behind why solar wasn't on that, and what was the shortfall, and what were the problems that you saw that didn't have solar on the chart.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. I'm old, so I might have forgotten your first question already. But district energy. So, well, 2 things happened. So at one point in time, when Grant was talking earlier about he did work for NCPC, this Northern Canada Power Commission, and we had all these systems across the north. They were captured systems. And Inuvik and Iqaluit particularly, and I think there was another one in Fort Smith or Fort Simpson. Well, basically, they were using the waste heat off the diesels, and the diesels ran all the time because that's what provides the community energy. And they had basically a pipe system that ran through town, and it fed everybody's house. Well, that wasn't the business that the utility was in. The utility was in the business of creating electricity. And, lost its focus. Costs of maintaining the utilidor system started to creep up. Rates started to go up because of that. Then one day, somebody came along and said, nah, you know what? I don't like that system. I'm going to put a furnace in my house. And then, they told their friends, and they told their friends. And pretty soon, there was a furnace here and a furnace there. And guess what? If you thought the cost of heating out of that system was really high when there was lots of customers on it, now that there were customers drifting off, costs went like this. And it just got to a point and everybody went, I'm out of here. I'm buying a furnace. So it killed itself. It was it was almost its own death. Costs got high, drove people to go to the market, get an alternative, and it died. And it particularly died when it wasn't being run as a larger system with one crown. Now it was being run by different individual operations, and nobody really wanted to be in that business. And so it went away. I think there's some real opportunities for that to come back. Inuvik has a system again today that they reincarnated when they got gas. They have a gas field just outside of Inuvik, which has gone dry. So now they're going to ship LNG to Inuvik to fill in for that. But, I really see there's many opportunities to do district heating in a lot of those communities with a little bit of a wider range of thinking about what you do in a community as a community. And I think that's really worthwhile to being brought back into the discussion, because I think there's some great options there. Solar, we actually didn't and haven't done any solar work other than as part of our energy charrette, we brought some solar people in, and they basically said to the room, it's too expensive for you guys. You can't afford it. So we've done little to explore it other than this. My son berates me all the time. I have this 30-something son who thinks I'm just this corporate, Death Star or something. I don't know. He thinks I need to do more all the time, more. I say, well, 99% hydro, not enough. You're not doing enough. You got to do more. He thinks I should have solar panels on everybody's house in the Yukon, which I can't afford. So I've compromised. We have a fish ladder at the hydro plant at Whitehorse. I know a fish ladder sounds strange, but it's basically a tool for letting the salmon, who migrate 2,600 kilometers from the Bering Sea to the lakes south of Whitehorse, to get them over the dam. So they go around the dam. There's a little quiet pool, and they go up this exit. And we have a camera in there. So if you ever want to watch salmon migrating, in the fall you can come on our website and look at the salmon. But we run this. It's a big tourist attraction, and what we've done is we put a solar panel on the fish ladder, and it is residential size. So we're going to run it for a couple of years, and we are collecting the data, and we're making the data available to everyone, so that if people want to make a choice, and based on the data, they can choose to put one on their house. So, okay.
Maybe I'll just add, I know that the city was a customer of the district heating, and we were sold that it was going to, cut some of our costs. But after we actually looked at our bills, it came to our attention that it was costing more. We had those discussions with QUESTtalks to try to attempt to figure out why. And at the end of the day, we pulled out because it made no sense to be paying more. And I think that only really the hospital possibly is still on it, but the government of Nunavut owns the corporation, is the primary client. For us, as I said, all it ends up doing is cutting into our budget for other programs or services, or having to increase the taxes, and it didn't make sense.
Ordinarily, I'm not supposed to answer, but once again, some of the things that are going on in the north is the mines are looking at specifically that issue, and they're looking at it as a hybrid system. So they're taking a look at saying I can either use diesel fuel, or I can take a look at wind diesel combinations or solar diesel. Rio Tinto in particularly has been interested in solar for some of the mining potential in the north. So that may change the equation a little bit, but that is yet to be seen. Sorry. Next question.
Oh, good morning. Paul Chiliak with the Canadian Gas Association. No discussion at Rideau Club would be complete without poking some fun at the feds, so it's my opportunity to do that. Say in this chair you had Bernard Valcourt, the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, Northern Development Canada, and Joe Oliver here. There's a role for the federal government in modernizing or revolutionizing energy in the north. What can these two gentlemen do to help support that?
I can't remember the names of the gentlemen. I don't really care. They're politicians. Sorry. Is there one in the room? Okay. Sorry. There's kind of a quasi-national energy discussion going on that Canadian Gas Association, Canadian Electricity Association, and provinces and many others are part of. But I think the really important question for government to think through at the political level is a more comprehensive view of issues. It's not just, we should have LNG, or we should build hydro, or we should do this. It's this breadth of thinking that says, what are the best options? Right? How do we promote that? How do we facilitate that as government? Because that's what government's job is. Government's job isn't to go out and make the decision that we should all have LNG. Those are community kind of, or smaller scale, provincial, community level decisions. The government's job is to facilitate structures and processes that promote those, enable those to happen. So I think there's a lot they can do. There's a lot they can do in terms of focusing policy, as well as providing meaningful opportunities to get funding programs that really work, right? the green infrastructure program really worked. It was real money, real projects. We were the first ones through the process. A really good process from in terms of how it, a relationship about how the money worked part. It wasn't one of these never-ending bureaucracies that, you never got anything out of. It was really well thought through, well thought of. There's some NRCan, the Eco-Energy funds. There's some really great programs. They've got to think about those in some really broad, in a much broader basis than they do. They get a little narrow focused from my perspective, but that's mine. Yeah.
My comment would be, and I really like the chart David had, and it calls out balance. So my challenge to whatever political foes or adversaries may be at the table is think of the bigger balance, because I think we've got a track record. If we go laser focused on the environment, there's wins and then there's unintended consequences. For example, the price of energy. If you go laser focused on the economy, you can find yourself in a completely different position. But if you challenge for balance, and I think balance is important, because I'm big on the economy, because it sometimes is a little bit quieter in the background, and we position ourselves to lose economic income that would help fuel the types of soft dollars we're talking about. So there's a balance in a circle here that the economy is really important. And I want to see the provinces attract business. And I can bring it back to natural gas. We have now in the world some of the lowest priced natural gas in the world. And I think there's an opportunity there that'll help with this balance if we do it right.
I think what I would add is, having been a former mayor, is that, and I think David alluded it to earlier, is that there's just a massive amount of infrastructure demands right across the whole country. And in the north, there are, particular additional challenges. And there probably is a time and a need to begin to look at, that national energy strategy and a northern one and how it fits in. But I like the balanced approach as we begin to look forward as to sort of doing that assessment and figuring out how we have the three different levels of government, plus, the communities and, the Indigenous population kind of come together to look at how the hell we're going to deal with these big issues. And they're not just, these short, 2-year to 4-year electoral periods. And because it is, for us, as you saw, it's very dire. And I know it's bad in many places, but we're going to find ourselves in a situation for many of our communities, if we just don't deal with it, we're going to go blackout. And it's serious.
Another question from the floor?
Yes, thanks. Ted Wilson from ACOM, Architectural and Engineering. One of the projects we're currently involved with is the design of a new school of architecture in Sudbury, Ontario, for Laurentian University. And a lot of the development of that project has been around bringing First Nations communities into the discussion about what that school should offer in terms of providing students the ability to design communities and buildings in a northern context. So a lot of the things that have come out of your comments today about how you would create building and community that does allow for people to survive over longer periods of times with a lot less energy is a real key part of the curriculum that's being developed for the school. So having said that, some of the things that have come to us in terms of the process, you talk about social license, you talk about listening, and the comments that come back from these remote communities have given us a tremendous amount of information in terms of understanding where that design process should go, and most of it comes back to conservation. So if I take your 4 points on your diagram, David, adding a 5th, they think of energy as being a form of conservation, or vice versa. Conservation is energy. They're looking at designing buildings now that in a Canadian context in terms of performance if I'm using, and I'm throwing a number out at 200 kilowatt hours per meter squared in terms of an energy intensity for a building. They're designing them at a tenth of that. So if that becomes a game changer in terms of the demand requirement for 17,000 people living in social housing, it hugely affects the amount of energy you want to deliver it and how you deliver it. The other piece is that idea of islanded. That's a tremendous term because again, that comes out of the experience that we've heard being shared by people from the remote communities. They accept that as a condition of the community, and as a result of that, they want a system, an energy system. It's smaller, it's lighter, it's adaptable, that goes with the housing. And we had an example of a family talking about how a child froze to the inside face of her bedroom in the winter. Nothing to do with energy. It had to do with a building envelope. So they said, we need a better building to start with. So we've got technology now that can provide a better building. We're building a building with an exterior wall and roof system at R60 or R80. So we've got a much better envelope, much lower energy requirement. So I would strongly ask, this kind of forum, an integrated discussion, a lot more of that to happen, bringing your expertise together to the communities on a much more broad basis. That would be something that I would ask. The sort of final question, I guess, is one of the comments that came from the kids was mines. They had an opportunity to visit, went down, explored, had the tour and so on. They said, awful warm down there. They said, there's our heat for our house. Can't we bring that together in terms of the community? You've already created it for us. Let's link those things together. So that kind of cross-disciplinary thinking is a wonderful tool that comes out of this kind of discussion. I wanted to ask whether you had any kind of experience with that in terms of linking a mine to a community in that way.
I haven't, because we don't have any underground mines that are operating. The couple that are there, one of them is just starting an underground operation, but they're way out in the bush. They're not near a community. But I actually want to avoid answering your question. I want to go back to an answer that I should have given earlier to your question about government and what they were doing. This is, and I should have thought of this, and your question made me think of this part of an answer that I missed. Government policy is really, really important in terms of setting the stage and the framework. And I'll be illustrative. Most provinces, and certainly federally, and this is why I talked about this energy policy piece. If it's a statement about, we're all really great, and we should use gas, and we should develop renewables, that's worthless. What we need is policy at the provincial, territorial, and federal level that's specific. Government can set the stage by doing this, and I'm going to use BC as an illustration. I wouldn't want to debate whether they're right or wrong, but at least they did something. They said, you will get 80% of all your new supply from renewables. You will get 50% of all your incremental supply from conservation. You will do. Clear standards, frameworks. That is a clear message about the direction you're taking that province in terms of energy. Yes, they have a big LNG export piece, that really flies in the face of that, because you got to build a whole bunch of new supply to export LNG. But don't take it and be critical and pick it apart. Take it and say that they put together a framework that very clearly said, we want to do conservation, we want to do renewables, and we only want to do those things. And that's the future going forward. Now, under that context, now we got the rules of the game. Everybody knows what game they're playing. We're not playing. We're not building coal plants in BC. You know, we might build a gas plant, but we're only building it under a certain set of demand scenarios. We're doing this, 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 or this. And whether right or wrong, it's the fact that there's clear enunciated policy from a province that says this is what we're doing. And that's what we need to do as governments. That's where government could be most helpful.
I would just, to your point on conservation, and I have accountability for that at Union Gas, and I will compliment our relationship with our regulator because we have a framework for demand-side management is what we call it, energy efficiency. A building envelope, a residential building envelope today in Ontario uses 30% less gas than it did 20 years ago. I think that's pretty phenomenal, and not that it's a utility that drove all of that, but we had a hand in that. We had a hand in helping industry use their energy wisely, and I think that relationship served well in Ontario, and I know they're on the front end of trying to structure something similar on the electrical side. And they haven't perfected it yet, but I know that the gas model works and is just a piece of, I'd like to follow up with you after the dialogue to hear more about your Sudbury location, because we're pretty passionate about energy conservation.
Time for one more question, I believe.
Hi, my name is Jacob Irving. I'm the president of the Canadian Hydropower Association. I just wanted to quickly ask a bit of a future technology question, perhaps, and that's the role of in-stream kinetic hydro, smaller hydro, potentially, in the north, and what kind of role it might be able to play, and if it's been looked at.
Well, in Iqaluit, there's the proposed hydro dam project. It's going through the sort of initial phases. So there's an application to the Nunavut Impact Review Board. As I said earlier, there's a delay because some consultants messed up. But I can also tell you that there isn't consensus in our community about the location, the size, and I will tie it also into the earlier question. There's a proposed diamond mine, which is a huge potential energy user. There hasn't, I think, been adequate sort of consideration or engagement with them about, where the status of that mine is, the potential for P3s. Because it's still early days, I would like to hope there's still an opportunity to actually kind of reassess that project and before we get too far along the stage and find ourselves, having built 2 dams possibly in the wrong location, not offsetting even what our current needs or demands are for our community, let alone our projected growth. So I hope that we can take the breather to reassess it and hopefully do it better.
Take it on, specifically on hydrokinetic. Sorry, on hydrokinetic. Northwest Territories Power Corp did a little pilot project at Fort Simpson on the Mackenzie River over the last couple of years. Didn't work very well, as I understand it. Must not have worked very well because they were trying to get me to take their unit off them and employ it somewhere in the Yukon. We looked at a couple of different options to try to do a little pilot project. Couldn't quite get the speeds in the river that we wanted to. My friends from Alaska Power and Telephone have one on the Yukon River in Alaska that they've had some real struggles with winter icing problems and debris. Yukon River is a river that gets lots of debris, as does the Mackenzie. We would love to try to find a little spot that we could run some experiment, a little pilot project. I thought I had one that would have been perfect, but we're still playing with the idea, I guess, is more than anything. But that's on hydrokinetic specifically. We don't have anything underway.
I'm quite cognizant of the time, so I'm going to go into, normally we go into our 2-minute drill at this point in time, but we're going to go into a 1-minute drill. Okay. I'd like to pose one final question to the panelists to think about for a few seconds, and then you have a 1-minute answer. Year's 2050. Climate change has a reality. We have a number of new energy technologies that have come to the north. We have a new regulatory structure. You have 60 seconds to tell me what the north looks like in terms of its energy use in 2050. And David, seeing as you have the most experience in the north from a utility, I'm going to put you on the spot first.
Okay, well, I think we have made some great strides in terms of defining the framework under which we operate, and we have clear funding programs in place that let us do what Madeleine really wants to do, is just on a proper functional basis, replace assets that need to be replaced and introduce new technology options to replace those assets where they work. But I think through that I really think that we can see a little bit of very small and maybe even some kinetic hydro, some wind, more of an adaptation of wind in the wind diesel kind of combination, and some solar. And I see that in that 2050, that'd be a lot.
I think in order to get to that end game, if we want to call 2050 an end game, I'd come back to my balance comment in order to generate wealth to facilitate and foster some of where we're trying to get to. Because none of these are free moves. So it's going to take funds, whether it's soft funds, whether it's taxes, whatever the source may be. It needs a vibrant economy to generate that and create, I think, the end game that we're looking for. And I think we're at the cusp of that now, and if we do it right, we'll look fondly back in the rearview mirror.
Madeleine?
Absolutely, that's where the vision that I would want us to be. Again, being maybe the little bit more optimistic cynic and somewhat of the balance of being a resident of Nunavut and a politician, is that unfortunately, unless we make some significant shifts in attitudes and direction and policy especially, will continue to be ad hoc. Situations are just going to be throwing money, after things have happened, and I almost shudder to think that the mines are actually going to have the most sustainable, the best infrastructure, but our communities won't. And I really think that we can divert that. That doesn't have to be where we end up, because I really do want a much better balanced shift approach and attitude to get to the end goal where we want to be.
Excellent. Before I turn this back over to Quest officials, I'd like to thank you very much for participating today, and I'd like you to take a moment to thank the audience. But before you do that, there's one thing that has really struck me about today's conversation, since the first one Quest did. Probably the thing that has struck me most about sitting here and being able to ask questions and listen to some of the answers is the North creates a tremendous opportunity for us. If we can solve some of the issues that are being dealt with in the North, then we truly can solve issues in the South. So they have the opportunity to be an incredible laboratory for doing things right, because there is so much opportunity. The costs are high, the stakes are high, but the outcome is critical. So we can learn from what they're going through, and for a change, I think, instead of having the South kind of impose thoughts on the North, we can learn from our northern members of this wonderful country and take what they're going through and bring those learnings to the South. So I challenge each one of the people that were sitting at the table here today to make sure that we learn from them as opposed to the other way around. And I'd like to have the audience take this moment to thank the individuals that participated in this. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I think that was a fantastic panel, and I just wanted to personally thank everyone who's here. So just one more round of applause for everyone who's been there. I think it was a superb start to QUESTtalks. And I think what we are seeing is an evolution just of Quest as well. And if I was asked, in 2050, what does Quest envision? That's every community in Canada is operating as a smart energy community. And that's really what we're after by 2050. Michael Harcourt has changed our goal to 2035. So we're a little bit more ramped up right now in our thought and process. So we appreciate everyone coming out today. And if you were to see those maps that people do at the end of sessions, and they take all the key words and they put them up there as this kind of overview of what you heard or what you took away from the session, I did a mental one. So here's what I kind of walked away with today. And I hope each of you are walking away with something that's useful to your work and your activities. And I heard, the terms balance, engagement, integration, innovation, the role of the economic regulator, conservation in terms of making sure energy efficiency is key in the mindset. But the one thing that struck me, David, was your comment actually about let people to come to their own understanding of what's important to them. Let them then come back to you to understand how they can be part of what your vision is. And I think that's what Quest is really focused on, about what the aspects of integrated community solutions are about. It's letting people understand what's important to them, letting them understand what they can achieve their energy needs, and then hopefully being part of their solution going forward. So thank you for your time this morning. Please feel free to remain here and continue to network afterwards. And we look forward to seeing you at our next Quest Talks, but also at our conference in November, Markham, November 12th to the 14th. I hope everyone's got it in their calendar, and the blackberries are coming out right now. So thank you again. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Union Gas for their support for our inaugural Quest Talk. So thank you again very much.